Okay, welcome back. Hope everybody had a great lunch. Hopefully you have praised the sun. Got outside for a little bit too. So this is going to kick off the second half of our day. I'm Scott Chambor, chair of the Alaska Coalition on Housing and Homelessness, and I'm going to do a little more than just introduce our next speakers. I have Mandy Ellison-Weed and Christy Hahn with Collaborative Solutions, who are going to talk about landlord engagement, specifically in rural areas similar to Alaska. So I'm going to hand the mic over. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, so first of all, I'm not really used to a microphone. I'm fairly loud. I'm obviously not from around here. I'm from Alabama. And I've never been told, Mandy, we can't hear you, but I want to make sure that I'm inclusive and that everybody in the room can hear me. So like he said, my name is Mandy Ellison-Weed. I work for Collaborative Solutions Incorporated. I've been there for about 4 years as a TA provider. Before that, I was, I do all the things permanent supportive housing. I've been known as a coordinator, permanent supportive housing coordinator. I've been a developer, I've been a case manager, been an outreach worker. You know, I've been other duties as specified in rural communities in Georgia and Alabama for about 22 years. So I was asked to come work at Collaborative Solutions when we got a rural capacity building grant. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about Collaborative Solutions and a little bit about that grant before we get started. And then I wanna know who all is in the room with me. I will go ahead and admit that I'm a little hearing impaired, so I tend to walk around the room when I present. So I'm not trying to get in your space, but I like to be very peer involved and have everyone sharing in the room and in the community and talking to one another and learning from each other. And I've been told that this needs to be on microphone and everybody needs to be able to hear it. So if I get close to you, I'm not trying to invade your space. I'm actually reading your lips a little bit. So I just want everyone in the room to know that, because I've had people just be like, what are you doing? Obviously in Alabama, y'all got space issues. Like, what's happening over here? And I'm like, no, I really just need to see your face while I'm talking to you and you're talking to me. So Collaborative Solutions is now a national nonprofit. We've been doing this work around housing and homelessness for 16 years. I specifically work in the Affordable and Rural Housing Department, as does my colleague Christy. We have been working under the Rural Capacity Building Grant through Housing and Urban Development since 2012. We got funded when they first started with the RCB, and we have now had funding for 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16, with a lovely staff of 2 or 3 to run all of that money all over the country. So it's lucky that we've all done this work before and we do know how to do the other duties as specified, because that comes into it a lot, as I'm sure y'all can understand. How many people do we have in the room who are currently housing case managers? Yay, go y'all. How many people do we have in the room who have supervised or are supervising case managers? Great. How many of you are friends with a case manager? How many of you are willing to admit you have a case manager? Maybe. I want to make sure that I'm inclusive of everyone in the room. How many people do we have that have been in this field for 1 to 5 years? Okay. 5 to 10? 10 to 15? Old school like me, 15 plus? Go you. Takes a lot. We're not usually doing this for the salary, are we? How many people do we have in the room who feel comfortable admitting, and if you don't, that's fine, have lived experience with homelessness or use of permanent supportive housing? Thank you for raising your hands. So that's what is really interesting, and what we're starting to see a lot more in trainings is that people are becoming invested in this field who have lived experience with homelessness. And what I know from experience is that homelessness looks very different in rural communities than it does in urban communities often. Rural also has an interesting definition. RCB, we do 50,000 people or less. So what I find a lot of times is that people don't call themselves rural. And sometimes HUD doesn't even call them rural. Or HUD says, well, that's an MSA. And I'm like, that's 30,000 people in the middle of nowhere. I don't really know how you call that an MSA, Metropolitan Statistical Area. If I use any acronyms that you don't know, please raise your hand and let me know, because I don't want anybody to be sitting around like, I don't know what we're talking about. So with this particular grant, what we have noticed is that there is a difference. My clicker stopped. There we go. There is a difference in what rural looks like what homelessness looks like in rural communities. What y'all are also going to notice while I train is that I tend to train kind of free stream of consciousness. The slides are there. I will make sure that everybody has the slides after we're through here so that we have them accessible on our learning management system, which is called Collaborate. I'll make sure that that information goes out to everyone who's registered so that you can go back, check your PowerPoints, look at all of the things, and reach out to me if you have any questions about anything that we've discussed. So again, I'll occasionally turn and look at it, and I've got Christy keeping time for me because I'll make sure that we cover the things that we say that we're going to cover, but I may not actually be going by the PowerPoint as we move along. So we don't have any handouts today because we're doing an hour and a half today, and then we're going to do another hour and a half tomorrow. Today we're going to talk about landlord engagement in rural communities. Like I said, I really don't want to just hear me talk for an hour and a half. How many of you are working with landlords? Actively, great. Okay. So a lot of times what I have found is that just because I wrote this and I had certain experiences doesn't mean obviously that I am the know-all. I am a TA provider, but that does not make me the know-all, end-all of all things landlord. So if I say something and you don't agree, or if I have something and you have more information, please share it because we'll be writing that down so that we can share that with people in other cities and in other communities who are also dealing with the same thing and need some ideas on how to best address landlord engagement in their communities. Does anybody have any questions so far? Can everybody hear me well? Great. Let me find out why my PowerPoint, there we go. So today, these are our learning objectives. Let me get over here. I don't want to read exactly out loud to you guys, but we are going to increase knowledge about marketing your program. We're going to learn a little bit more about how to effectively engage landlords. Going to identify some strategies tomorrow when we're here for strong tenant, case manager, landlord relationships and good communication. We're going to develop some strategies for improved relationships with landlords and property managers, and we are going to strengthen eviction prevention. This is actually a 2-day curriculum that we can provide in other areas, and sometimes we can do this through webinars. So if there's interest that you might have in your community for getting more, since we're only going to be getting about 3 hours worth in the next couple of days, please feel free to reach out to me and we can see what we can set up. So I've already asked, we have a large group. I don't want to waste time asking each one of you to tell me your names, but I did find out who we had in the room. Case managers. How many executive directors? That's the one I didn't ask. Thank you. Thank you, executive directors. Being executive directors of nonprofits are, such a sexy job. It's a good time. So let's talk about module 1. A lot of times what we forget, or maybe we don't think about, this is one of the things that I've really noticed as I've sat at the table with developers and I've sat at the table with landlords, is that there's 2 different languages that are being spoken. There's case manager language, which I've also heard referred to as do-gooder language. And then there's everybody else. And those are, we need to make money. So when you're working with landlords, you need to understand that their first motivation, their first driver, may think you know this, but their first driver is that they are looking to maximize their investment, to reduce the risk, which is something you can use later to market your particular program, to maximize their return, to remember that it's a business, and that we need to know and remember that in rural communities especially, small landlords, what I call mom and pop landlords, those tend to be the biggest providers of housing that we can actually access. How many of you are working with small landlords? Landlords who own 1, 2, 5, maybe up to 10, right? And we all know that if you lose one, what happens? Excuse my language, you're kind of screwed. Because there's not a whole lot left out there that can work with you. If you lose one, you're down one big possibility for somewhere that you could house someone, somebody who might be willing to take your voucher. So when we are talking through this and we're talking about marketing and engaging those relationships, we need to remember that not every relationship that you have with a landlord, not every time you put somebody in housing is going to end up successful for everyone, but we still have to work to maintain those relationships so that possibly they're willing to take a risk on us again. Because if we go back and we remember rental housing is a business and they are looking to maximize their investment and reduce their risk. Here's 4 things that landlords want. Same things that we want in our neighborhood. Good neighbors. How many of you would say you're a good neighbor? How many of you have ever been a bad neighbor? Okay, just saying, it's out there. I've been one, I'll admit it. We all had times early in our lives, or maybe even, midlife, where we weren't the best neighbor. They're looking for somebody who's going to take care of their property. They're looking for long-term renters because that means less money spent, less turnover, less drama, less having to deal with you, less having to deal with your clients. That's really important for them. And they want rent paid on time. I always say that one last. It's at the bottom because actually, if you build good relationships and you've done a good job marketing, you can get your landlords to remember that they're getting a subsidy. And that subsidy may not come by the 5th of the month, but it's always going to come. It's going to continue coming for the time that you said that it's going to continue coming. After that might be out of your, ability to manage, but that's a real important thing for them. If you build relationships and you continue to market effectively, you can get landlords, because I have had to stand in front of multiple or own phone calls when I was a supervisor of about 75 or 80 PSH units in 47 counties of rural Alabama. I've had to be on the phone with some serious good old boys going, look, I promise, if you'll just give me 4 more days and it's coming. Like, I know it's late, but you're going to get paid. And as long as they got paid, they were willing to continue working with me. So how many of you currently market your housing program? 1, 2, 1.5. 1 iffy. Okay. That's where we're going to start then. That's awesome. we got some stuff to learn. What I've noticed a lot of times is that with some agencies, we market our agency. We don't market our housing program. So when you're marketing your agency, that's different than marketing your program, because usually Joe Landlord does not care much about your agency. They care about where that subsidy is coming from or where that case manager is coming from. And what we also realize is that you do not market to a landlord the same way you market to a client. You do need to keep some certain basic things in play, but you do not market to your landlords the same way you market to your clients. And sometimes when we start out our programs, we make a fact sheet that's supposed to cover everybody. It's different information for landlords than it is oftentimes for tenants. Marketing the program is the best tool. That's where you start. We're going to do an activity before we end today where we talk about how you start to market that program. We're going to give you some ideas as we go through. So this is what I was asking before. How many of you mom and pop landlords, one more time? How many of you property management organizations? Okay. Other service providers? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, sometimes we forget other service providers actually can be landlords for us. We often have, clients who have coexisting conditions. And we often have some really smart clients who know they have coexisting conditions and are getting services from here and services from here and services from here. And if we don't have relationships, we oftentimes need to have a release of information, obviously, if we're talking about specific clients. But having relationships with those other service providers lets you know what's available that you might could access for one of your clients. Because always a service provider is going to be like, wait, this subsidy comes with a case manager for how long? Like, what does that look like? That means that's less work for me. That means, possibly, even if we have who all in here is providing rapid rehousing? Okay. Choice vouchers, housing choice vouchers. You may be working with housing authorities. Do we have a housing authority in the room? There you are. Good for you. I'm glad you're here. So what we oftentimes see, though, is that people forget to have those relationships with housing authorities. And each of the housing authorities can operate very differently. Some people have had great experience with their housing authority partnerships, and others have not, because the housing authority is like, we have a waiting list. We don't need anybody else on the waiting list. We have plenty to fill our own units. But having that relationship with those other service providers at least allows you to get on as many waiting lists as possible. Which is different than your coordinated entry system. How many of you are participating in your coordinated entry system? Good answer. I'm sure there's probably a reason in the room that everybody who's in here like, I'm doing it. Everybody know. It's a struggle to do coordinated entry in rural communities, isn't it? It can look very different, and we're all still trying to figure out a lot of what that looks like. But coordinated entry is different than getting people on waiting lists for housing, for specific housing. Sometimes you can reach out to your landlords over and over again, and they're like, well, I've already got somebody in there, but I might be evicting him. Put me on a list. Call me next. Even that's a tiny waiting list, but at least you're getting your name out there, you're marketing your agency, and you're letting them know that you're interested in that. Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay. So, I'm betting since we only had 1 or 2 people in here who are actually marketing their programs, we got the Ish is about to raise her hand and tell me something. I was like, are you marketing? She was like, maybe a little bit.
Like the Property Managers Association, and starting to work with the Property Managers Association and telling them just about different vouchers and housing choices.
Great. Do any others of you have landlord associations or real estate associations? No. No. Okay. Yeah, so it's very different in different communities, but most rural areas, it's more of an informal association. I also like to think about the Pastors Association, which is really just the group of pastors that hang out and have breakfast together once a week. They don't call themselves an association, but if you can find the right person, you can get in with the pastors who oftentimes know the landlords. So it can be a little bit of the same thing. But if there is a real estate or a landlord association in your communities, find it and make sure you have an opportunity to sit down and have a conversation with them so that they know that you exist. Do any of you have flyers for your agency? Any for your program? Okay. Are they specific to landlords, or are they landlord, tenant, whoever wants to know?
We have more letters to landlords that we put together with a card about the program that doesn't have all of the, eligibility and stuff like that, because they don't care.
Right.
So we just make it like more pictures.
Exactly. So basically what she said is we have a letter and we put it with a business card because landlords don't care about every single service we provide. That's true. They really don't. They care that somebody is actually going to help them keep the unit filled. They care about the subsidy, but they don't really need to know every single thing unless you're building a relationship and they ask. What about social media? Anybody using social media? So, hold on. I will admit that I have been a little bit sick, and I'm also from a very humid place. Even with the snow, it's a little dry here, y'all. So if I have to go back and check, it's a little dry. So when you use social media, have you had good experience with social media? I think there was someone in the back who said they had used some social media. Do you mind would you speak to that a little bit? I'm gonna have to give you the microphone.
We don't offer housing. We support the housing and getting in.
Right.
So we're a peer-run organization. It's on Facebook, and we have direct contact with landlords. Well, I do. So we help house people. There is a website, and there's also a Facebook.
Okay, great, thank you. Anybody else using Facebook or any other social media platforms? Craigslist? Anybody ever get any landlords off of Craigslist? I mean, I know it can be a little iffy, but I'm just curious. I like to poll the room and see what the experiences are. Okay. Have any of you ever hosted a landlord event? Yes. How did that go? You can give me a shake or a no, or... You have one every year? Yes. So how many people do you have show up for that?
Not many.
Yeah, because you don't have very many landlords, right?
We're with the Matsu Valley. In the Matsu Valley, we have probably about 10 of the landlords normally show up, but we're trying to push it this year. We've got one coming up in April.
Okay, great.
And hoping to multiply that by about 3 to try to get as many of our landlords and property managers in there as possible. And we mainly just ask them what they need from us and what we can do to help them, and then we let them know what they can do to help us.
Anybody else doing a landlord event? No? Okay. We all should. We should all at least do one once a year. Whether you're providing rapid rehousing, whether you're providing permanent supportive housing, affordable housing, just supportive services only, Whatever it is, if you can figure out how to do it, you should have a landlord event, and I'm going to tell you why. Everybody likes recognition. Even shy people like recognition. They may not want to stand up and tell you about it, but everybody likes to get a pat on the back for doing good work. That may not start out as their primary motivator, but everybody likes to get attention for doing good work. And when you have a landlord event, you have the opportunity to provide something that I don't know about y'all, but I really like to get, which is a trophy or a certificate or a letter of appreciation or even free lunch. Like, whatever it is, people like affirmation for work that they're doing with you. Even if it's really only that they filled out a lease with you and they take your money. They still like to know, and they like for other people to know, that they are doing something to support their community. So that is an opportunity also to very politely, without calling people out, talk about fair housing law and ways that they should not be discriminating against people or doing illegal things. People don't like to be told, that's illegal, you can't do that. They do like getting education that helps them understand that that's illegal and you can't do that. And landlord events are a great way for you to be able to provide that information. To get up, and we don't want it again, it's got to be that one pager. None of us are fair housing lawyers, or at least I'm not. I have a couple of trainers that I work with who are like, I'm not a lawyer, but my significant other is. Still not fair housing lawyers. We cannot speak to things we don't know. But if you could have a fair housing lawyer come and talk to them for 5 or 10 minutes and explain a few do's and don'ts and yeses and no's and here's answers to this that you might not have been aware of, that's always a great thing to do at a landlord event. A landlord event always should have one thing. Somebody answer what that is. Food. Thank you. Food. It should always have food. Always. I'm not telling you to spend your own money to feed people, but hey, food is the way to go with people. They're not going to show up if you're not going to feed them. To be honest, I provide at least once or twice a month a free capacity building training for people just like you guys, and it's free. And it cost a lot of money in like 18, 19 hours for me to get here yesterday. And you know what somebody's going to write on my evaluation? Hopefully not amongst you people, but it has happened in the past. We did not have enough coffee. And I'm like, you got free training. Like, we're in rural communities not getting enough, professional development and all these things. And you were cold and didn't have enough coffee. And that's what you've got to say about the training. Food. Always have food and coffee. So when I come do these, I'm like, find me a space, and please, Lord, find somebody to at least bring coffee and some bottled water. We may not can do the food, but let's just make sure that people have something to drink. So that's what's really important about hosting a landlord event. There's a few other things. How many of you are cold calling? Excuse me. Just picking up the phone or showing up at somebody's office and saying, hey, what's up? Let's talk about my program. How many of you are doing that? Somebody raise a hand. Okay, because I was like, lies, what? How are you finding people? We've got to start at ground zero. Like, that is how I have found people my whole career, is just showing up. And I've had some experiences where it went wrong on me and it went really right. But cold calling is something that most of us are doing if we have some sort of program. Now, I get it. Rural communities, not a lot of housing, not a lot of funding. You're not oftentimes having to look for clients. We got clients showing up plenty of times. But cold calling is a way that we really can get in touch with landlords that you didn't even know were landlords, because they don't have to advertise. They don't have to be a part of any kind of association. They can put a for sale sign, a for rent sign in their yard, and they've got somebody willing to fill it the next day. That's at least how it's happened in most of my counties, and basically, honestly, all over the country where I've been over the last 4 years. So cold calling is something that you do when you're out. Let's say you take a client somewhere. How many of you drive clients? How many of you take clients places? Okay. How many of you drive home? That should be everybody in the room, because I doubt we've got a lot of mass transit in the rural communities. Maybe it's different here, but most of you drive, fly, boat, something home is what I found out yesterday. If you are doing that, you have the opportunity to look for those for rent signs. And if you're looking for those for rent signs, then that's your opportunity to call someone. And if you call someone, you need to be ready to say something fast. And we're going to do that in a few minutes. We're going to have an activity that'll teach you how to get in, how to say the things you need to say, and how to make that first step. Because here's what I'm going to tell you right now. Do not ever show up to a brand new landlord with a client in tow. That's going to go so wrong for so many. How many of you have had that experience? I said, don't ever show up to a brand new landlord with a client for the first time. Have you done it? Yes, lots of people have. Just show up. I'm here to help this person fill out an application. Yeah. There's so many issues about that. There's confidentiality issues. There's like no prepping a person who might have serious, multiple existing conditions that might not be in a place if you're in a housing first type program where they really need to be talking to a landlord right out of the gate if you haven't had conversations. So making sure that you are working with landlords and that you're having those first cold call kind of conversations is key when you're marketing your program if you want to be effective in how you do it. Any of us still using direct mail? Okay, good. Some people still are. Please don't waste your stamps. I don't know about you all, but if I get things in the mail that do not look important to me, like, a bill, a Christmas card, a birthday card, possibly money or something from my mother, I'm not opening it. I'm not going to open it. It's usually going right in the recycling or right in the trash. So people have said to me that they are still using direct mail, but I am going to be the first one to say that, we already have a lot of stuff when we're working in nonprofit world where money goes out the door. Let's not make it stamps too. How about attending health fairs or community fairs? Do you guys have those here with the hospitals, with any mental health groups, and you're going to those? No? Okay, some of you raise your hands for me so I can see, yes, you're going to health fairs. When you go to the health fair, are you there specifically for your program or for your agency, or is that the same thing? It's the same thing. What is your agency name?
I work under the supplements of Haven House with the VFAC program.
Okay. Tell me.
Yeah, sorry. I'm from Homer and I work at the supplements of Haven House, and the HAT program is through the Haven House.
Got it. Thank you. Okay. So what we have seen a lot of times in rural communities too, and maybe it's not the same case for all of you all, but you'll have a specific nonprofit. So for instance, I worked for 13 years in HIV care. So now imagine working in HIV care in rural Alabama. That's why they pay me to come talk to y'all, because that is a hard job. It's a hard job to convince people to let me come in and talk about things like HIV and sexually transmitted illnesses and all kinds of things that go along with that, and also convince people to take my voucher. That's something I did for 13 years, and honestly, if I could have gotten more money for it, I'd probably still be doing it. But when you attend these health fairs, you need to also be thinking about what you're going to present at these health fairs. When you go, are you looking for landlords? Are you looking for tenants? Are you looking for people to partner with you? Exactly what are you looking for? What is your goal when you go to a health fair or a community fair? Does anybody want to give me one? Thank you. I was like, awkward silence. Come on.
To build relationships.
To build relationships. You know what? You just became my favorite person in the room. I'm going to talk for an hour and a half, but the end result of what we are doing here is that if you do not build relationships, you do not have landlords. You oftentimes also don't have happy clients who maintain stable housing and continue to do better and more well for themselves over time. So yes, when you go to health fairs, you're looking to build relationships with other providers. Maybe you're looking for tenants. Maybe you're looking for people who need your rapid rehousing or your permanent supportive housing. Maybe you're looking for landlords. You need to have information for all of those different people. Just a one-pager. Not, a whole file folder of things that you throw at them, but just this little one-pager that tells, oh, you're a possible landlord or you know a landlord. Here's a piece of information for what we can provide. Let me talk to you about that. If you're looking for a tenant, somebody walks up, they look like they might be a tenant, different information, different way of presenting it sometimes. So making sure that you have those things if you're going to those places is key. Can anybody think of any other places where you can market your program that I haven't mentioned? Any other places or ways?
Poster on local, just bulletin boards.
Yes.
How many places don't use any of these other things in Alaska, or people don't care, and the bulletin boards are like actually a pop-in place for.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Somewhere like a hardware store, a general store. Most small landlords are also small maintenance people. They are jacks of all trades, my friends. They're doing their own plumbing, they're doing their own leases, they're doing all kinds of stuff, and they have to go get those supplies somewhere. Thank you, because that is a huge one in a place for you to find. And I've also had landlords go in who maybe they already had one of my clients, or maybe they knew somebody who had a client. They go pull one off because they're like, my brother could really use this program. So that's a great place for you to put that information.
Some other communities also have Facebook groups. Homer Communications is a very spicy place.
Wait, what is?
Homer Communications
Homer
is a
Communications.
Facebook group for the entire town of Homer.
And it's spicy.
Anyone can say anything they want, including your advertisement.
Oh, that's pretty awesome. I might need to get that link to go home and look in the hotel at tonight and find out what people are saying in Homer, Alaska. Because there's actually, we were in, where was I last time? I was in Detroit doing an HIV symposium, and she was like, you have got to go to the Baker something something police department website. It is the funniest thing you've ever seen. And I was like, the police department website? And she was like, yes. She was like, there are things on that site like, don't forget to wear your pants and don't give them away tonight. It's going to be 20 degrees. And I'm like, what? Enough people give away their pants that they have to put this on the police website? But I did go look, and it was hilarious. So you're right. Social media can be huge, and it can be a great place to advertise. It can also be a sketchy place to find yourself. So I had this weird situation where I was actually looking for tenants. That has never happened to me in my entire life. I've never had to look for tenants. But I found this landlord, and he was willing to rent me 5 units. Neighborhood, transitional would be a good word for it, but still a rural community, still people who need housing. But what was happening was that the agency that I happened to work for had gotten a pretty crappy reputation before I came along. And so people were like, no, we're not even dealing with them. So I was having a hard time finding some tenants. And I finally found this landlord. Well, HUD doesn't like it if you lease out 5 units under a master leasing program and then don't put people in them. They frown on that. So one of my landlords said, hey, look, I'll put it on our church's social media on Facebook. And I was like, that's great. Please do. Within, 2 hours, my personal cell phone was getting blown up because that's the number that he put on the Facebook page. It's been 5 years, and I'm not lying. I still get phone calls. Like, I'm looking for housing in Walker County. Do you have any ideas? And I'm like, I don't, but I know who might. Hold on, let me give you her personal cell phone number. Not really, I gave him her email address. But still, I'm just saying, don't be really careful about what information you put out there, because it can still, especially in Homer apparently, it can get a little spicy on you. I like the word spicy. I'm going to be using that one. This is some other ways you can create a landlord newsletter, because we all have time to sit down and create a new landlord newsletter. But it actually can be that bridge between your landlord event and then you have your newsletter that possibly you put on the website. So maybe it's not that you're, again, wasting those stamps. You're emailing it to people. I have found that these days most people have email, or have a significant other who has email, or has a teenager who has email. Someone in most houses has some sort of email, okay? That's what I have found to be the truth. They're like, send it to Frances. She'll tell me what you send. Well, whatever it is. But if you create that landlord newsletter, you're providing information about your program, any changes to your program, because I don't know about y'all, but if you're funded by HUD, those things can change from year to year or month to month. Sometimes they change. Your landlords need to know that. They need to know about changes to the program. They need to know about changes for qualifications to the program, maybe the fair market rent changes for that year. That landlord newsletter is a way to keep people up to date on what's going on. And also remember, tell them that without saying it, that's not legal. You can't do that. Like, we always put something about fair housing into a newsletter. So if you can send that out even every 6 months, quarterly, send it to her at Homer, whatever, but make sure that information gets out there. That's a great way for you to keep the momentum going on your program. Because what I have found is that a lot of people market in the beginning and then they slow down a little bit, and people forget. There's turnover all the time in property management. There's turnover and people don't know who you are all of a sudden, and they don't know that you're providing case management, so you just remind them. open house we talked about. Okay. Also, 5-minute mission moments. Does anybody know what a 5-minute mission moment is? You actually did this. I don't know if that was an intentional face, but I can imagine like, oh, I do. I know what that is. Have a lot of people who are introverts. Look, my face tells everything too. Like, I've had people in these trainings say something to me and I'm like, what did you just say? Without being able to hide any of it. But a 5-minute mission moment is what we're going to practice in a little while. But what it is this is going to be, I'm going to go Southern on y'all. It's what it is, what it ain't, how you can, and how you can't. That's what you do in a mission moment, okay? That is your opportunity to get up in front of people and tell them what your program does, what it cannot do, what you can, like what you as a case manager can do, what you can offer, all of those things, and you say it fast, and you get up and do it in places that you might not even think it's worth doing it. That could be churches. That's why I call it a mission moment. I personally am a United Methodist minister's preacher's stepdaughter, which is the worst kind of preacher's kid and the funnest, in case you're interested. But that was how I learned, is my dad actually told me, go in front of the ministers. I also had one of my clients tell me one time, there's 2 people that you don't want to show up uninvited at your house. I was like, besides me? Like, as your case manager? And they're like, yeah, besides you. That would be the cop or your preacher. If either one of those show up at your house unannounced, you're like, uh-oh, something has gone wrong. Like, what have I done wrong? Who's done something wrong? What's happening? So a lot of times, if you can get up and talk in front of a congregation, you have no idea who might be attending that community of faith and who they may know or what they may have that they're willing to rent out. You know, a lot of times people have a mother who has just passed away, or a parent or a sibling, and they have a family property that they haven't figured out exactly what to do with yet. But they might be willing to lease it to you, and you just got up in front of a church and talked for 5 minutes and found somebody that didn't even know they wanted to be a landlord. So a 5-minute mission moment, I would say, is above even feeding people and having a landlord meeting. Direct mail to local real estate agencies. I'll tell y'all in a story. Just show up. Don't bother with the stamps. I already told you about hosting a landlord event. You must have food. Intentionally recognizing people is important. Everybody loves a trophy. Everybody loves a certificate. How many of you have a successful client story? Okay, well, at least there's a few in the room. How many of you have unsuccessful client stories? Well, that's even better, okay. Or you're just not willing to admit it, like, well, maybe I do. I have several. We all do. I think if you're a case manager, you adjust your thoughts around what case management and housing case management looks like. If you have a successful client who's willing to work with you to get up and speak in front of your group at your landlord event, awesome. But let's work on practicing that before we have someone do that. There's also the opportunity of having a successful client who's willing to write a letter. Maybe they're just willing to sit down with you and have you write the letter. Some people don't feel comfortable admitting that maybe they don't feel like they're capable of writing a letter, or that that's not something they feel really comfortable in doing, but they are willing to work with you and have you kind of write down their thoughts, read over it with them, make sure that this is their truth, have them sign it if they feel comfortable with that around confidentiality. And then that's information that you can present at a landlord event or even in your newsletter, so that you can let people know, we know you just want to make money, like, we get it, but most of us still do have some altruism. We still want to make sure that our communities are safe and decent and that people are not homeless. And hearing that your program actually has helped people makes them want to buy into your program a little bit more, because they know that it's not just money that's going into the void. Not all of it. Some of it's going to people who are being successful. When you have a landlord event, when you have any interaction basically with a landlord, but when you have a landlord event, ask questions of those who attend and be ready to answer when they ask you questions. Even if your answer is, well, Bob, I'm not exactly sure of the answer to that question. Give me 24 hours and let me ask someone else, and I will have either them get in touch with you or I'll call you back with an answer. Always answer the questions. Always. Anybody got any questions so far? Anything they want to share? Okay. So when you're marketing, you're going to leave no stone unturned. And these are places that we like to think of going, and I'm really interested to hear any others, because I've got a great one that I don't add to the list just to see if anybody else in the country will say it, because it was so amazing when somebody said it to me before. So there's faith communities. Any of you going and presenting your information to faith communities? Okay. Chambers of Commerce? Okay. County Commission? Yes, some. Supportive service meetings. Who all attends a regular supportive service meeting? Some of you? Some communities have them, some communities don't. It depends. If you have one, if you can find out if you have one, that's a great place for you to go. You can find people. I actually once went to a supportive service meeting and had somebody present on a program and came and told me, did you know that the owner of Wright's grocery store, and by the way, I told this story at a conference this past fall and realized that Fred was sitting in the room, and I just told a story about him, and I was like, glad that was the truth. But Wright's grocery store decided, the owner of Wright's grocery store decided that they wanted to start doing something about what they were seeing as more of a homeless problem in their community. And so they partnered with a local low-income tax credit developer who was doing a lot of development, and said, hey, Fred, what can we do? Can we develop some more properties? And so just for me going to that to present about what Collaborative Solutions had done, I was like, oh, you need to talk to so-and-so. This is who could provide the services for this particular program. If Fred is willing to put forth the money for the low income and the development, and you're willing to put forth a little bit of money to go into a foundation, well, this is the agency that could provide the homeless population that you're looking for and some supportive services to go with it. So there's always the possibility when you go to those meetings of doing what? Building relationships. That's right. Rotary clubs. Have any of you ever gone to a civic organization, Rotary Club? Saw the face over there again like, yeah, I've been. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But a lot of times you will find somebody there who might know somebody who has a house. And we're just looking sometimes. Success as a housing case manager in a rural community, I think probably in any community, is one success at a time. I used to think I could change the world. Now I just want to change one. If somebody opened a door for me and let me do my visit that I had scheduled, I felt like I had succeeded for that day. So even if you just find one at one Rotary Club a year, it's still a success. Others? Anybody got any others? I got a great one, but I'm waiting to see. Can you hand me my tea? Yes?
The library is a really good place to talk to people that they do a lot of services for homelessness, and a lot of other agencies are coming in and using the rooms, and so it's a really good place.
Librarians have become my new super friends. They're doing some amazing work out there that they're not getting paid for and that they're not getting attention for. They're teaching people how to operate computers so those people can look for housing and jobs. They're allowing people to stay in out of the cold even when possibly their supervisors have said they shouldn't do that. Oftentimes they're finding food for people. I love a librarian. I was actually going to be one until I fell into housing. So I do have a special place for librarians. Anywhere else?
Yes. In Alaska, especially in the rural communities that we have here, tribal meetings are big.
Thank you. Thank you. So are you able to find landlords or mostly clients, or how does it work for you at a tribal meeting? Is that service providers or?
The rural communities are a little bit different.
Yes, I know.
And so when you're talking about housing authorities in our rural communities, those are not public housing authorities. We only have one public housing authority in Alaska. And they are located in Anchorage with, I think, 16 different hub places. But in our
16 different complexes or offices?
16 different offices. So they're in 16 of 200 communities in Alaska. So the other communities, in a lot of the tribal communities, which are our true rural communities, there are tribally designated housing entities that fall under Indian housing.
Yes.
And so when you're talking about going to tribal meetings, it is more of a building relationships, making sure that the tribes know what the housing authority is providing, and most times it is to provide information to the public and the tribal members that might attend that meeting, also because especially in our rural communities, the people that serve on the tribal boards are the people that are the mayor and the from the housing authority and so yeah and yes, so it's just a little bit different when you're talking about rural, and how I see the presentation for me is more of a urban lens.
It feels more urban to
Yeah.
you? Okay, that's interesting. So I think there's always, thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of times when I'm doing this, there is different perspectives on what is rural as opposed to what feels more urban. And I will be honest and tell you that this is the first time that I have come to Alaska and done even a training that I developed as a rural provider seems a little above and beyond what you guys might be thinking of as rural. And that's okay. There are still some things that we can gather from this that are working in communities of 3,000 people. Community can be different. And I know that you guys, it's totally different. I mean, there were some things that they wanted me to talk about around housing case management, and I was like, I have no idea how to talk about that in Alaska. I'm not exactly sure what that looks like. I think it can look different depending on what your service coverage area is, all of those things. But if we do have some things, say like social media, there's still opportunities for that outreach to those landlords and finding, like what I have found in rural communities is creativity is astounding. I love talking with anybody who's providing on tribal lands or in rural communities, because you have to be so creative and flexible on how you provide the services and how you think about reaching out to people. It looks very different than if you're doing that in a more urban area. Does anybody have another one? Okay, I'm going to tell y'all the best one I ever heard was in Lafayette, Louisiana. And I actually knew him, and he had invited me to come and talk to a bunch of the people in the community. And I had worked with Alton a lot, and so he told me that I could tell you guys this. He had been a housing manager for an HIV agency for a while. They also had housing that was specific to just various disabilities and homelessness and chronic homelessness. And like he had branched out. They were doing all kinds of homelessness work. And he just spoke up in one of the meetings, and he was like, eviction court. And I said, I'm sorry, what? You go to eviction court to find landlords? And he was like, yeah, where else are you going to find somebody who's ticked off and just wants to fill up their property and just kicked somebody out and needs to make some money? I was like, that is genius. That's genius. By the time somebody gets to eviction court, they are ticked off, right? And they're out some money. Every state is different. I don't know what eviction looks like here. Some people are like, we don't have eviction court. Well, in some communities, you just have a municipal court, and eviction people are on the same roster as or evictions are on the same roster as everyone else. Sometimes as a case manager, you may be going with one of your clients because they're being evicted, and you're going to advocate for them to not get evicted. Depends. Like, there were lots of reasons, but I had never heard of anyone. Is this still working and you guys can hear me? Okay, great. I had never heard of anyone who had gone to eviction court to find landlords, and I was like, be real. Did that actually work for you? He was like, 5 times. I have gotten landlords 5 times in the last 10 to 15 years from eviction court. Some of them had 1 unit, some of them had 15, but nobody likes an empty unit. And nobody is more vulnerable than when they have just spent a whole lot of money and a whole lot of emotional investment because somebody has destroyed their property or not paid their rent or had some sort of crime happen on the property. Whatever it is, that's not a great place for a landlord to be. And guess who becomes a super friend at eviction court? That is a case manager. Because everybody can have people who have different things going on in their lives, but not everybody has a case manager. Whether you have a subsidy or not, you still have a case manager. Let's say your subsidy lasts 6 months, but your case management services can last 2 years. You are still someone who can be on the ground and say, hey, look, I will be there. I'll be doing visits. I'll be checking in. Now don't overpromise. Whatever you're doing in your particular program, that's what you tell them that you can do. But that's still something that they've never had with any of their oftentimes with any of the ones that they're in eviction court for. So you actually have an opportunity to sell yourself. And he was like, oh, you gonna put me in the PowerPoint? I said, no, I'm gonna find out if anybody else is going to eviction court. Like, we're gonna save that one. That one's in my pocket. It's pretty amazing. The last one is keep showing up, keep showing up, keep showing up. My own personal experience with this is that there in Auburn, Alabama, there was an apartment complex that I knew had openings because I had other clients and they just weren't receiving case management services at that point. But this particular real estate company would not accept any kind of subsidy. And the woman who worked at the front desk hated me. She hated me. I showed up and she was just like, no, we don't accept subsidies. That's our rule. That's our policy. We don't do it. And I just kept coming back and I kept coming back. Probably once every couple of months, I would come back. Any chance you want to receive a subsidy now? I saw you got 5 empty units. She was like, this lady is stalking my apartment complex. And I was checking. I knew that there were empty units. And finally, I said, all I want is 5 minutes to go in and talk to Jim, who you keep telling me is not here, but I hear his TV. He's watching Price is Right. Like, I just want to go in. I know you can't make the decision, but I know he can. All I want is 5 minutes. And I brought you some Girl Scout cookies. And she was like, you're never going away, are you? And I was like, nah, really, if you've got 5 units I could possibly use, I really don't want to go away. I have homeless people who need those properties. And that happened. Like, that happened to me in that situation. Like, he didn't close his blinds fast enough. I know he's in there. Just give me a chance to get in there and have a conversation. And I actually did end up with those 5 units. And until the program ended, I kept those 5 units, and we had 5 people who were chronically homeless and veterans and were receiving housing. So if you keep showing up, obviously not in a stalkery way, if you keep showing up and letting them know that you really are invested, sometimes you can change people's minds. You just have to know that oftentimes the front person, the general manager, that may not be the person making the rules. So when you're marketing, you have to think about who you're actually marketing to. It's not always going to be the person at the front desk. It's going to be getting past the person at the front desk to talk to the person who might be in California and just happens to own properties here. And being willing to ask, okay, well, who makes those decisions? Can I get that phone number? Can I talk to that person? Sometimes you can get people to change minds if you are busy making those relationships. The Girl Scout cookies didn't hurt. I don't know, but, you know, we ended up with some people housed. We talked about this. This is what I call my marketing toolbox. So if you don't have these things, you might want to start thinking about maybe first talk to your executive director or your program supervisor to make sure that you are reaching all of the branding criteria for your agency. We don't need to just be out there providing one-pagers. And believe me, I've seen people do that. And I'm like, did anybody know you actually made this? Because it's got like typos all in it. Like you need to make sure that those program agencies, those program brochures or the particular program brochure matches whatever you might have for your agency and that it's been approved. But making sure that you have both of those to hand out to landlords is great. Letters explaining, like one person over here had the letter. That's a great idea. Client success stories, we talked about that earlier. Sometimes I'm going to repeat things because studies show that adult learners need to hear things 7 times before it kicks in. And I have a terrible memory. Sometimes I need to hear it more than 7 times. So this is a little bit of a recap. But testimonial letters from other landlords. We did not cover that earlier. But if you can get a landlord to tell other landlords that you have paid them reasonably on time, that you've shown up when you said you would show up, that you've helped keep traffic down in their complex, traffic meaning people living, moving in and out of the units, whether they are on the lease or not. Whatever you can find, if you have a landlord who's willing to speak for you, that is great information for you to take when you do a 5-minute mission moment or when you're, again, supporting someone at a landlord engagement event. How many of you have business cards? I did not for years until I ordered my own business cards. It was not something that our staff of 3 could afford. I had my boss's business card that I could hand out to other people and scratch her name out and put mine on it. Had that for a little while. But if you don't have a business card and your agency can't afford that, first of all, ask permission. And second of all, if you choose to, you can get some of those made for like $5.99 online. It's just something that you can hand out to people that helps them remember. Because like she was saying earlier, bulletin boards are great, and that's information that you can stick on the bulletin board along with maybe your poster so that they have something to take away with them. Sorry. Sure. Hold, please, for an important announcement. for the site visit at 2 p.m. Okay, guys, so there's transportation outside right now for those of you who wanted to go to the Housing First and St. Vincent site visit. They're here if you're interested in going for that site visit. We're almost at 2, and I'm supposed to be done at 2:30. Oh, good, okay. Thanks, guys, sorry about that. I just want to make sure if you wanted to go do that, you had the opportunity. Thank you for staying with me as long as you did. By the way, one thing that I forgot to mention is that there are evaluations on each of your tables. If you can fill out an evaluation, that would be great. I would really appreciate it because HUD likes to know that I showed up and did what I said I would do and that y'all gave me positive or negative feedback, whichever, so that I can make changes to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the people who are in the sessions. Yes. Oh, also, and we've lost some people. I wish I had mentioned it earlier. There are some sign-in sheets. I know that you all signed in when you first came in to show that you were here. But if we pass around these sign-in sheets, there's a place in there for rural communities served. That's information that I have to be able to report to HUD. I can ask my favorite close colleague, Elizabeth, to Google that for me, but she really likes it when I bring the information back to her instead of asking for her to do research. So if you see the sign-in sheet coming around and you wouldn't mind adding your information to that, that would be really helpful for me. Thank you. Sorry I didn't mention that earlier. So here's what's in it for the landlords. First of all, we said money, right? But when you're talking to them and you're selling yourself, how many of you offer any kind of tenant education or landlord education classes? If you don't and you can, you should. Something. Probably most of the time when you're talking to your clients, you're offering tenant education. You may not realize it. But you are offering something for whatever they're asking. That is the potential for tenant education. Maybe as part of your program, you have reached out and you're working with somebody who's doing budgeting programs for your clients. Does anybody have budgeting programs that are offered to any of their clients? Or you're doing the budgeting work yourself? 1 or 2? Okay. A lot of times your banks might be willing through the Community Reinvestment Act to offer some of those budgeting opportunities for you if you would like to be able to offer that to your clients. That's a great place for you, a resource for you to look to just see if it's a possibility. Landlord education is what we've been talking about earlier. You're really wanting to make sure that you're letting the landlords know what's legal, what's not, what's changing in the program, what's happening. You might have a lease addendum. So I heard that a lot of you are providing rapid rehousing. Do you all do lease addendums and other people, like the actual client, sign their lease and you do a lease addendum for them? Some? None? Maybe? Are any of you doing master leasing programs where you actually hold the lease with the landlord and your clients live in the properties? You've stepped away from it. Okay, yeah, most people are starting to step away from it, but there are still some programs out there. So additional housing support to address housing and lease issues. This is what we were talking about earlier. Everybody wants to avoid eviction. We want to avoid eviction because, we don't want our clients losing their housing. We also want to avoid eviction because if they get evicted, they're harder to house next time and we might work with them again. How many of you have clients who have come back through the system more than one time through your particular program? Right. Well, if they get evicted, that's another barrier. So what we're really wanting to do and how you sell yourself to the landlord is to let them know that you really want to work with people to keep them from getting evicted. And you want to work with the landlord to keep that eviction from happening. Every state has a different eviction process. So whatever your process is, make sure that you are aware of it so that you can continue to have conversations with your clients and help them avoid eviction at all costs. Because eviction is harder to deal with than even bad credit. I mean, you can go in straight up with a client and say, you know what, my client probably would not be my client if they had good credit. So let's just not even bother to look up that credit because we all know that it's not going to be great. You can still sometimes get people to work with that. They're not as happy to work with you if there's already an eviction that's happened. But if there is an eviction that's happened and you can say, I'm working with this client to make sure that it never happens again, that's just another way of selling yourself and your program to potential landlords. Home visits. If you're doing home visits, this is where you start right after subsidy. First, I offer subsidy if you do. Second, I offer home visits. Landlords love knowing that somebody else is coming into the property and that it's not just them that's putting eyes on the property. They love knowing that you're coming, even if you just get into the parking lot and your client won't let you in the house. You can oftentimes tell a lot by what's going on in the parking lot, depending on how big a unit it is, or what's going on in the neighborhood, or what's happening in the yard that looks like somebody might be decompensating. Whatever, if you're going to those units, or you know somebody, one of your staff is going to those units, you can address that before it gets to like massive hoarding issues. Have any of you ever had a client who's a hoarder? Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I saw you raise your hand. Decompensating. So let's say that you have somebody who has been adherent to their medications, and they've been doing well, and so everything is going well. They've got a job, they're taking their medications, they're attending substance abuse meetings, they're seeing their doctors regularly, and then all of a sudden you start to see that is starting to decline, and that person is starting to decompensate. Maybe they're not taking their medication quite as much as they need to. Yeah, maybe they've started drinking and now there's like 3 trash bags of beer bottles in the front yard. You know what I mean? Like, there are ways that you can kind of see that maybe somebody is not as stably housed as you had been hoping that they were going to be. Does anybody else have any questions around that one? And so I did have a few hands on hoarders. Yeah, okay. That's an interesting one. But it is, and it's very complex when you're working with someone who has hoarding tendencies. But when you can kind of address that from the beginning and start to see that, you can actually start actively working with a landlord. Maybe you can start working with the client on mental health. Like, there's lots of different ways you can be proactive around those things. And then sometimes I have found myself being a finder service. I've had a landlord who had a unit that he did have to evict somebody, or he did have a unit become available, and because I did have a subsidy, or I did have a case manager, because I've had programs of both kinds. I've been supportive service only, and we have money. So it depends on what you've got and what you can offer, but that is a possibility. I've had landlords come to me and say, my brother, my sister, my so-and-so just found themselves homeless. Do you have anything? So you can actually become another resource for that landlord, and landlords love resources. Everybody loves resources for our family members or our close friends. And usually that just takes a phone call. So here's the secondary benefits to landlords. Well, that first one, participation in ending homelessness. Again, what I said earlier, we all want to have safe, healthy communities. We all want to have good neighbors. That's not the first way you go in and talk to a landlord. The first way you go in is offer, if you have financial assistance, what you can provide in that way, or whatever it is that you have. But then you also can go to, and if you help with this, we have less homeless people on the street, or living in vans, or doubled up with family members. Homelessness looks different in rural communities. We know that. Abandoned houses. It doesn't always mean you have people under overpasses. Sometimes it means, tent encampments. Whatever that looks like, you can talk to them about what the actual homelessness problem is in their community and how they can help alleviate that problem. Communication. You are able to provide that translation. Have any of you ever found yourself in a situation where you were translating between two people? Maybe it was language. Maybe it was actually just one was speaking very emotionally and very angry, and the other one was very angry and emotional, and they could not hear each other. I have a teenager. I've done that a lot. Yes, you have. What would be an example of that? Like between a client and a landlord, or? Yes. Thank you. Those are all really good examples, and they're very, very true. The reality is sometimes it doesn't matter what we do. People don't always like us. Or sometimes we let our own biases get in the way and we just don't like one of our clients. And if there's a way that we can hook them up with another case manager or help someone else help that person be successful, that needs to be something that we can work on. But that translation, what I have found a lot of times, like a prime example of that, keeping within my time. A prime example of that would be that I was working with a person who was a veteran who had pretty significant PTSD, and it had taken us a while to, find him a housing unit and then get him to actually sleep in the housing unit. So he was sleeping outside and staying in the unit during the day. He did not like at all, and it wasn't just didn't like, it was a major trigger for him to have people come into his property unannounced. So when pest control would come, that was unannounced. So then he wasn't allowing pest control in. when the reality was he was getting that note. The note was coming, but somehow the note was getting lost in the situation. And so when we were able to have a case manager step in and say, okay, I think here's what's happening. We don't want you to have roaches. Let's talk to the landlord. Let's figure out if there's another way. Maybe the landlord can call me and I can call you and let you know when. So there are ways that you can kind of work around some of these things. Yes, there are policies and procedures, but being that communicator and that translator in the middle oftentimes is a major key for keeping a unit and keeping, helping a client stay housed. You know, like we talked about earlier, you're someone to help things end well. Sometimes, just like sometimes we're not liked by our clients, or they're not liked by us, landlords don't like us, whatever. Sometimes things are just not going to work out in a property, period. It's just not going to work out. If you can be a helper and a translator, and you can be in that relationship and help that person say, hey, look, please don't start the eviction process. Give me 30 days, give me 15 days, give me so-and-so, whatever, and let me see if I can find another way to help this person stay housed, even if it's not here. Most of the time, people will work with you a little bit unless it's gotten just too far or too bad. And you can be that person who helps things end well and keep somebody from getting evicted. This is something that it took me years to be able to actually have this. But if you're going to be reaching out to landlords, whether your staff is 5 people, 50 people, 4 people, there needs to be some written strategy. There needs to be communication amongst your staff members for how you are going to engage landlords. There needs to be conversation. A lot of times we are siloed. So we're doing one program and somebody else is doing another program and somebody else is doing another one. We are not all... we're not all the kind of people who can just get out there and talk to people. I lost my word for a minute, but we're not all extroverts. I am an extrovert, obviously. Just because you're a case manager doesn't mean you're an extrovert. Some people are introverts. And that's okay. Every kind of person is needed in this particular work, and we all have our skills. But there needs to be a strategy. Even if we can't go so far as to say a written strategy, there need to be some open conversations with other staff, whether that be your executive director, your case managers, your admin assistants, if you have somebody, your volunteers. People are going out there and representing the agency over and over and over, and they need to be having the same language. They need to be sending the same message. So we need to think about what that message is and how we all kind of go about saying the same positive things. Every program may be a little different, but sitting down and talking about how you message best to landlords and other community members within your agency is key, because what we have found is everybody's doing it differently. And I have gone as a case manager to a landlord and him say, I'm not working with y'all. I already talked to Tina, and I just didn't like Tina. And I'm just like, well, I can't speak for Tina, but you might like me. Let's see if we can work out something else. So making sure that everybody's telling the same message is huge. Landlords should know everything they're agreeing to, and y'all, landlords are going to need to hear it over and over and over and over and over, because you're going to give them a piece of paper and tell them what you're offering as a part of your program, and you're going to think you've covered it. And then when it's time to recertify and re-sign a lease or whatever, maybe you're going to tell them again and give them the piece of paper. Sometimes landlords can't or don't read. And sometimes landlords need to hear things 7 to 10 times. And sometimes landlords will, give a car to one of your clients. That actually happened. They will cross boundaries. Or they'll think that you're able to provide a service that you never said you could provide. I am not coming over there, Fred, at 10 p.m. to pick up Joe because Joe is high. I never said I would do that. That is not part of my program. So making sure that you explain pretty much in some form or fashion, almost every time you talk to them, what you can and can't do is key to maintaining a relationship with a landlord. Already said earlier, people deserve an answer every single time, even if your answer is, I don't know. Even if your answer is, we don't have that in this community. That doesn't exist. Whatever your answer is, as long as it is honest and you provide it, it's worth giving. Yes, ma'am.
Can I get the mic? Sorry, I kind of want it on the camera.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dash. So I just want to I'm going to be all over the place, but this is just an idea because we do rapid rehousing with, actually through YHDP with Covenant House, Alaska. And just another thing that we're actually working with our young people being housed, it's instead of getting evicted or an eviction on their record for the rest of their life, we do the mutual terminations with the landlords as well. So that's another option that we could go, you could use as well. And definitely keeping that relationship with the landlords, like it could be a weekly basis, a daily basis, but always having an agreement. And our rapid rehousing case managers have been really working very well with our landlords in regards to those situations where we do have, some of our young people that do fall out of the rapid rehousing programs and stuff like that. But it's one of those moments of embarrassment, which is everybody gets embarrassed when they get evicted from some place. But our rapid rehousing case managers have been really very, very consistent in reaching out to them and being like, hey, we are actually whatever situation happened or whatever is going to happen, we're still here, even if you get out of that housing, rapid rehousing or whatever housing situation you are in, we're still going to find another placement for you. Maybe you weren't ready at that point, but it's definitely from a question that was asked to one of our rapid rehousing young people that was in the program, but then fell out. We asked what could have been done to not have you in this situation, like in the homeless situation again. And according to her response, it was all of you guys did the best that you could do. Like everything was amazing. I didn't do my part. So to me, that's a learning curve for a lot of our other young people as well. So just a push and some information. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. What did you call that? Mutual termination? Yeah, okay, so I like that wording. That actually can happen. We have lots of people who say, well, there's a lease. I'm in a lease, I can't get out of the lease. You'd be surprised if somebody doesn't want to have to deal with an eviction and you promise you're going to get out, they might be like, okay, well, let's just terminate this, because remember, she's correct, there's not a lot of housing stock. If somebody moves out of a property, there is usually somebody else we can get into that property or help access that property, or there's someone else who can access their property on their own, and the landlord is always liking that. So it's always worth the ask. I am all about the don't really ask permission, ask for forgiveness. You don't know if you don't ask. Making sure it's legal, obviously. Don't do anything illegal. But if you ask, you can get a lot more than you think you can. It's always worth the ask. Thank you for sharing that. Does anyone else have anything that they've done around eviction prevention or talking with landlords about mutual termination? Has anybody else done that, mutual termination? Yes, and it's been successful? Great. Yes?
Both times that we had someone fill out for a new program, we could not contact the person. They weren't responding, but we just made sure the landlord saw us there multiple times, knocking on the door, taping letters to the door, putting letters under the door. And then we just straight out asked, we haven't burned this relationship with you, right? You would be willing to house more? And they were, oh yeah, so just getting that so that kept the relationship for the next person. And we called them multiple times and told them what we had tried to do to contact the person.
Thank you. That's hugely important. It goes back to what we've been talking about around relationship building. There are going to be plenty of times when our clients are not ready. They're not ready to maintain stable housing. That doesn't mean that we're not ready to maintain a relationship with somebody and possibly be able to provide that housing again. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about just keep showing up, keep showing up. One of the things that we didn't discuss earlier, but I want to give you guys an example because maybe you've had this experience. I had landlords who were calling sticky notes leases. Oh, yeah, we've got a lease. Well, what is your lease? Well, he signed it and I signed it. We put a date on it and say he's going to live here. Really? That's not exactly can I see that? Oh, that's actually a sticky note. That's not a lease. I can't give you subsidy with a sticky note. Let's provide some education around what a lease looks like. And by the way, I have a template. Here you go. Here's one that, is actually listed as a legal document. Let's possibly use this. I don't know that anybody else has had that experience, but I had it more than once. I've had sticky notes. I've had notebook paper. I've had, just something stuck to the door. Yeah, I said he could live here. You also could say he can't live there anymore, and then he could be homeless again. So you need to make sure that's part of that landlord education. Also, I've had landlords who don't have any rules. They don't have, why would they have rules? They have one house, no rules. You actually become a resource. If you come to them and say, hey, well, one of the big agencies or one of the big rental properties in the area is using this example of this is an example of what they're using for their rules. Maybe you want to put this as a part of your lease so that you have rules that keep you are working for your landlord and you're showing them, I'm not just here for the client. I'm not just here for the client. I'm also here for you. It's important to me that you maintain your business because without your business, I don't have housing for my clients. Has anybody ever gotten one of those sketchy leases? You have? I'm just curious. I mean, was it like in writing? What was it? Did you?
Some people try to do like verbal leases. I saw it a lot with like this person is renting a room.
Right.
Like I live in the house and I'm going to rent a room for somebody. It's important to also have that documented in some way.
Sure. Okay, so he was talking about specifically, like some of the example he had was when you're renting a room in a house instead of maybe the whole house. There's got to be some sort of lease or people are not protected. I have seen a lot of lease to own that's not actually lease to own. So someone has told a client that if they continue to pay this money and they work on the property, that they can, eventually that money's going towards buying the property. And it happens, leasing, yeah. Have any of you ever experienced that with anyone? Yes. I know you look kind of like, what? Right. But I will go ahead just as an example, and I've got a few more minutes. I grew up so I have a stepdad who's a minister. I told y'all that. But I also am a child of a divorced family. And so my parents were divorced when I was 3. And my dad was a handyman and a nurse. And so he oftentimes would rent properties, and I doubt he had leases, but the deal was you can live here rent-free for a while if you'll just fix up the place. And so he would be living there rent-free for a while and just fixing up the place, and then the next time I know, it was every other weekend that I saw him, the next time I know, we'd be living somewhere else fixing up the place. That's my own example of we were living in some serious substandard housing, and I doubt he had a lease because we left every 2 or 3 months, and he would just move into another place and start working on that place for a little while. I think some of it was that he was a wanderer. I think some of it was just, it was the 70s. I don't know. But he didn't have leases, So that's just an example of what is happening out there and how we can advocate for our clients and let them know that you need to have a lease. You deserve rights. A lot of times we forget that our clients may not feel empowered, that they have rights. And the same can be said for landlords. Does anybody have any more examples or questions about that? Okay. So this one is interesting for me. Read that first sentence. Can somebody read that out loud for me? Very first sentence. Calling on you because you're closest to me.
In each of your service areas, some subsidized housing units may exist. Many of these are 9 apartment complexes that offer lots and amenities for tenants.
Lots of amenities. Lots of amenities. Do any of you know of any housing complexes in your rural communities that have lots of amenities? Right. What's your what would be an example you think of an amenity? A gym. Gym. What else? Pool. Somebody said running water. Yes, actually. A clubhouse. Clubhouse. Tennis court. Play community center outside. Barbecue. Golf course. Right. Much of it doesn't exist anywhere, to be completely honest. So I was in a room that was mixed. It was very urban and very rural people. And the urban people looked very bored with me because of the things I was talking about, and they honestly were giving some of these examples of amenities. And then all of a sudden somebody sat up and said running water, just like you did. And somebody else was like, well, you know, there's cable or internet. And somebody said, a heater, air conditioning.
I was just going to share when the Anchorage Coalition, when we were coming together to define homelessness, because in Alaska, so many people still have dry cabins. We didn't consider it, like nationally, like if you don't have plumbing and water, that is not housing. But in Alaska, would that be fair to say? So we're like, no, we can't say that because there's a lot of dry cabins and that is housing.
Right. It's defined differently everywhere. And there is definitely a difference oftentimes between rural, very rural, and urban areas. And it sounds like very rural here. I have seen people living in housing that was very substandard, but it had belonged in their family for years and years and years and years. And so they owned it. I own my housing. I'm not homeless. There's sewage running under your floor, and I can see the dirt, and I can smell it. That's substandard housing, but everybody doesn't see it that way. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, Southeast Alaska has float houses.
Float houses. People living on boats. No.
Houses on rafts.
Oh. Okay, so rafts with houses. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, somebody was telling me yesterday that they had that people lived on boats, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. You know, it's not something I really have dealt with very many places. One other quick story about amenities. So there were the people in the room, and all the urban people were giving things like, you know, tennis courts and playgrounds and blah, blah, blah. And then other people were like running water. And then one woman said, I live in a community that's got 3,000 people, and we have a gated community. And I said, gated? She was like, yes, there is a gate. And another woman stood up and she goes, that is not an amenity. The gate doesn't work. It's not a locked community. You just swing it open and anybody can walk in. Just because it's there doesn't mean it's an amenity. It's not keeping anybody in or out. And she was like, well, there's also security cameras. She was like, there's also fake owls perched on top of the thing, but that doesn't make them real. Those security cameras don't work. So, you know, I mean, there are ways that you might look at something. I mean, it was so funny to see these two women go back and forth at each other. I was like, my job here is done. This has been great. Okay, mic drop. We're done. But so it's really interesting things that we think about as amenities and how we need to look at that in different places. It's our understanding that many agencies don't know about or are not talking about complexes to find out what housing is available and how to help clients access those units. This goes back to that supportive service provider thing that we were talking about. Maybe a client has kind of been kicked out of your program, but maybe they won't be kicked out of another program. Like, it's possible that just because they didn't continue to meet the criteria for a veterans program or a mental health program, it doesn't mean that they might not meet the criteria for HOPWA, Housing Opportunities for People with AIDS. You never know. Making sure you know what's going out there with your service providers is key. How many of you have a resource list, housing list, landlord list? Everybody. How many share it with other people? We got some sharers in the room. That's nice. Most people are like, no. I worked for those landlords. Those are my landlords. My people are going in those units. I took the Girl Scout cookies. That belongs to me. Well, here's the reality. You're probably at some point going to lose one of those, but that landlord could work for somebody else. Sharing actually is something we all should have learned early in school, and it's easier if we all share those resources because you never know when you might could use them later. Or somebody could use your resource and possibly fix your reputation where one of your clients was not able to stay stably housed and an agency decided that they hated your guts. But you found somebody else who might have a subsidy or somebody else who could go into that program, and you can then say, hey, look what I did. I gave you their number, like, you know, and don't you still, you can like me again. Maybe we can work together again in the future. You know, you're providing something for the landlord and not just taking. These are all the different kinds of various housing programs, making sure that you know what's available in your area. The list may be nothing. But if there are whatever is available, it's good for you to know, and that changes fairly often. So this is not a static list. This is a list that you need to be checking up fairly regularly. Just be like, hey, did we get any new vouchers around? Whatever the population is, finding out what's out there, whether there's a waiting list or not, knowing what the possibilities are is important. So you want to learn about the existing units. You want to make contact with the property managers? Obviously. Remembering that vacant units generate $0. So staying in contact with those landlords could mean the difference between they rent to somebody tomorrow or they rent to you today. Because you stayed in contact. Like somebody was saying earlier, we just kept calling, we kept those relationships going, we kept on. They might actually be willing to take your case client with a case manager before they'll take that next person who was on the list and made the phone call. Knowing the rules, remember what I said a few minutes ago? If you know the rules, you might can change them. Not break them, but adjust them. If you know what the rules are and somebody's charging $50 for a credit check and you know the credit check is going to be crap, maybe you can talk to that person and say, hey, we know the credit situation is bad. But remember, my client comes with this, and this. So why don't we just think about maybe bypassing that? Or maybe your agency is doing a background check, some sort of background check. Or they're in a reentry program, like whatever the situation is. That's another fee that you can knock off for somebody. Hey, we do a background check. And we're providing case management services. And the client, I've had landlords look at me and say, well, what kind of crazy are they? Well, what kind of disabilities do you have? That's illegal. You can't ask that, but in a nice way. So making sure you know what the rules are, you are able to better advocate. You're better to be able to be a professional advocate for your client and also for your landlord. Unpaid utilities, it's really hard to get around that one sometimes. But sometimes if you do admit to unpaid utilities and you do tell a landlord that that person is working to make amends with that utility company and pay that, there are landlords who might work with you on that. Because I don't know about here, but specifically like in Alabama, instead of just say Alabama Power, which is a big company, there's also Opelika municipalities. And so Opelika might have water, power, and sewage or trash all together in one bill. And that means if somebody can't pay it, everything gets paid off. And if they can't pay it, gets turned off. And if they can't pay it, that's a chunk that then goes against them. So if you can find ways, you can even find ways to work with utility companies if you're willing to have those conversations. And the history of eviction, foreclosure, or unpaid balance with a previous landlord, a lot of times, depending on what the reason was for the eviction, you can have that conversation. If you've built that relationship with the landlord, you can have the conversation about, hey, look, yes, they were evicted. Once again, you have to have your confidentiality, your release of information. Maybe you coach your client on how to have this conversation. But there are ways that somebody might still be willing to take a client even if they've had an eviction. Already said that. So we're at the end. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. I would love for somebody, yes, I've got 2 sharers. I love it. Sharing is caring, people. Taking care of each other. If I can get by. Okay, who was first? Go, Dash.
Hi again, sorry. Okay, so one thing I was just gonna mention throughout the process of getting those apartments or things like that. I'm speaking on behalf of specifically our young people, our young adults, is walking them through the process of looking at the apartments and asking the question what do you think, how do you feel within that either area, or just to give them some kind of power over holy crap, this is actually happening. I'm gonna be able to have my own place, my own space, and actually walking them through that process definitely helps in a way to give them the idea and give them that mindset of, yo, I'm gonna get an apartment. This is very possible. So I think I just wanted to point that out because I think that's another big, a big thing for our young people, specifically speaking out of experience. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dash. She actually just gave a nice little tidbit feed in to what we're going to be doing tomorrow for our hour and a half, which is awesome. No, I really appreciate it, which is going to be around eviction prevention and tenant readiness. So we'll be talking about some of those things and how important it is to continue to have those conversations with your clients and some ways that you can do that. And you, my friend, Julia.
So probably everybody in the room knows this, but I just wanted to amplify that Alaska state law doesn't protect housing discrimination for LGBTQ plus people. And I think that's an important thing to remember, because just yesterday I had somebody way outside of the age range of the folks that I work with who was asked to leave their apartment because they identify as pansexual. And there are some municipal laws that protect folks, but it's a tricky thing when we're reaching out to landlords to make sure that we're talking about equity in a lot of different directions, not just for LGBTQ people, but some landlords are going to be more likely to rent to certain intersections of identity than others, whether it's legal or not. So we want to remember that.
Thank you. That brings it back to fair housing and knowing, again, not expecting you to be a fair housing lawyer, but knowing what is protected in your state, what's protected federally, and how you can have those conversations with both your landlords and your clients. Thank you for bringing that up. We're at the end. Does anybody have one last closing statement that they would like to give us before we break for whatever's next? Because I haven't looked at the agenda yet. I think it's a break, maybe. Am I promising a break when there's not one? Oh, okay, there is a break? Okay, good. I did not make a promise. Okay, great. So thank you so much, everybody, for sticking with me. I've really appreciated having this conversation with you guys. I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow for those of you who are still around. Thanks. Break time.